And here's the car. So before we start hammering the engine in, there's a few things I want to point out in here. Most notably, these hoses down here. These are the transmission cooling lines. This has had a remote cooler installed on it. And the big novelty of that is it's completely separate from the radiator. So that's one really big hassle we don't have to worry about when we're putting this thing together. Of course, it would help to get all the garbage out of here first. Now, looking back here, the engine bay looks like it has a lot of room, but it fills up fast when we put the engine in. And there's the exhaust. And there's the power steering pump, which is a real hassle to install on the engine block. So I have the water pump and the crankshaft pulleys off of it, so I'm hoping that's going to make it easier. But we'll see. And if you want to see it, there's the cooler down there. Aftermarket kit. Came with some plastic fasteners. It's being held to the condenser that way. And the hoses, they were also in the kit, so I didn't really have to buy anything other than the kit. So let's see what we can do here. And working on bolting the engine in. This is the bell housing down here. There's 3 bolts here, 1 here, and way on the other side there's 1 bolt that goes in from this direction. And if you're wondering how I got that bolt in, I didn't. I just left it. And that's just how it'll stay. Now under here, see the front of the engine, there's 2 bolts holding the front mount to the engine. I already installed those. You can't see it from here, but the bracket between the engine and transaxle, I've installed that. Wasn't the easiest thing, but got it done. And I just finished installing the exhaust down there. Now, like I said, it's really close between the engine and the firewall, but one remedy for that is without the engine mounts that go on the front up here, you can rotate the engine and transaxle over. So that's what I have this apparatus for. So it's currently leaning the whole thing towards the front, which is making it easier to work on the back. Now there's a bunch more little things to put together. Alright, it's the next day. I was working last night installing the air conditioning compressor and the starter, and that's all done. I also installed this thing. I don't know what it's called, but it holds the generator and the belt tensioner, and the coolant for the heater goes through it. Also installed the heater hoses. And I'd like to point out that this part has these tubes down here that run coolant from the engine to it. There's 2 of them. There's another one down there. And originally these were made out of plastic, and they're notorious for cracking and falling apart. Now, Dorman makes aftermarket ones out of aluminum. They're available at just about any auto parts store. And this one's already been upgraded to that, so they last longer. Now, next I'm going to install the plenum, the fuel rail, some other stuff, and figure out where all this wiring goes. Wiring up the engine is pretty easy. You just plug all this stuff in. The only real challenge on this is this end of the harness, which goes behind the engine and under the car all the way to this plug, which is the O2 sensor way at the back. So if you want to completely separate this harness, you need to unplug this from under the middle of the car about and carefully weave it through the heat shields. It's not that big of a problem, but it was a real hassle to figure out the first time. So here's the wire that goes to the O2 sensor, and while I was working on it I noticed something. This mount here to the body, I don't know if you can see it, but the bolt is loose. It's sticking down further than it should. Then I looked at the other side, the same mount, and it doesn't even have a bolt in it. So this thing was being driven pretty much daily. How this thing was holding together at all, I have no idea. This whole thing needs to be removed to install the radiator. Just found out. And several hours later, it's finished, back together. Now, a few things I want to mention. The coil pack, it's directly on top of the water inlet for the engine, so I'm going to make sure you get the hoses on with the clamps tight before you install that. And on this side, there's like no way to get to the clamp with the filter on, so it's a good idea to tighten that up before putting the filter back on. So we'll start it up and see what happens. Yeah, it runs bad. But let's start with the good news. Now, it does run. Now, my biggest fear was that it wouldn't have oil pressure and it would spin the bearings, but it had oil pressure almost immediately. So, there's probably some kind of tuning issue going on. Now, I hooked up an OBD2 scanner and it said the manifold absolute pressure or MAP sensor is defective. So, on this engine, it's right on top of the PCV valve right here. This thing detaches. So I tried taking the sensor off. This is the upper half of it. The lower half is like welded itself onto this thing. So went over to the local auto parts store, bought a new one. This is 62 bucks. I probably could have found a cheaper one on the internet, but I didn't want to wait. So I'll throw this thing on and we'll see what happens. Well, that helped, but it still runs really bad. So we plugged in the scanner, and it told us that cylinder number 6 was misfiring. We discovered the injector was not working on that cylinder, so I replaced it with a new one. Now, on that subject, these injectors are really easy to replace on this engine. It works! We fixed it. It runs great now. So this is the 9th day, I think, since we first started it up, and this car has been driven since. And so far, no problems. Now, it's not complete. There's still a few like brackets and stuff on the engine that need to go on. The one bolt that was missing on that mount, it's still not there. I just tightened up one that was already there. So this is a long way from completion, but it runs now. There's nothing wrong with the engine anymore. Now, when starting it up, like most computer cars, the computer had to relearn because we had the battery disconnected for so long. And sometimes they do quirky things. What this one did was, if you step on the gas and then let go, it would stay at about 2,000 RPM for about 2 seconds before going back to normal. But after running it for about an hour, that went away. So, what else is there to mention? So I know what you're all wondering. Does it still overheat? Well, no, actually. The temp gauge gets about to the center of travel and stays there. If it gets a little past there, the cooling fans turn on and it goes over to the cool side. But that's it. Driven it all over the place, up and down hills. That's the worst of it. Which, that's about how the Classic runs. So I figure that's normal. It doesn't go much beyond half anymore. So yeah, no problems to report. The coolant, I just took the cap off earlier today, and it's still right at the top, and it's still clean. So, I'm not worried about anything right now. I think this will work. If any problems do happen in the near future, I will certainly let you know. So, thank you for watching. Like, dislike, comment, subscribe, whatever. I'll see you in the next video.